Welcome back to another video. And this is a pretty different one for me. I've had lots of people ask me about the gear that I have and particularly the gear that I'm going to be taking to Mull. So I'm off to Mull in 2 and a bit days. And before I pack my bag for the final time, I just wanted to take everybody through the stuff that I take with me, both when I'm out in the field, but also on big trips. Now, some of the gear that I'm going to talk about now is gear that I have with me all the time. Other bits of equipment are going to be things that perhaps won't make the cut for Mull, but they're part of my predominant setup as a wildlife photographer. So let's start with the bodies. So I shoot predominantly with a Sony A1. It's absolutely amazing. I love it. The autofocus is phenomenal. The quality is amazing, and obviously the megapixels means that, particularly with bird photography, where we can't always get that close to the subject, we can crop in a little bit in post if we need to. And it's particularly good in that way because we can be creative. We should never be thinking about taking the tight portrait all the time. It should be something that is an environmental shot first and foremost, and then if we need to crop in post to get a little bit closer, then at least give yourself the flexibility of having that as an option. So I've got the Sony battery pack on my Sony A1 because it obviously gives me the flexibility of both landscape and portrait. And it also feels, for me, ergonomically a lot better in the hand. I've got a couple of CF Type A cards in the camera. They're quick, they're amazing, their read and write speed is phenomenal, and this is 160 gig. So I think with 2 of those, I've got about 2,500 images in RAW, which is enough. And the second camera body that I typically carry with me is the A74. So this on, for example, when I'm on safari, I'll have the A1 with my main lens, I'll have the A74 with perhaps a wider angle or a zoom lens, which then gives me the flexibility of being able to use both, have both, and particularly when you're on safari, you don't want to be changing lenses onto bodies all the time because the dust will get onto the sensor and you're going to create issues. So if you've got a second body, it's amazing. Also, when you're traveling as far as some of us do to some of these far-flung places, you certainly don't want to be going there and having one camera fail for whatever reason. It's technology, sometimes it does, without having a camera to back up. So if you can have a second body, I would always recommend it. A74 is an amazing second body. It's also really good for video, so I can get 4K video on that as well, which is brilliant. And for Mull, that will probably have, for example, when I go out with Mull charters, I'll probably have my 70-200, which I'll talk about in a minute, on the A74, and I'll have my main lens on the A1. So lens-wise, until very recently, I was shooting predominantly with the 200-600. So the Sony 200-600 has obviously got the internal zoom, which means that you don't have the flanging that happens with a normal zoom lens, but it also is, for a zoom, pretty sharp, pretty fast, and okay, it's 6.3, so you haven't got a load of light, particularly in the UK when things start to get a little bit darker towards dusk and certainly before sunrise. But the way particularly that the A1 shoots is pretty good in low light. So this has stood me in amazing stead for the last 3 years or so since I changed over to Sony, and I love it as a lens. It probably won't come to Mull, but it's still an amazing backup lens, and it's still great to have the option of the flexibility of the zoom. Now, my new main lens is this, which is the Sony 400mm 2.8 G Master, which is incredible. It's super sharp, even at wide open. It's incredibly fast. It locks on, it tracks phenomenally when paired with the A1. For me, I don't think that I can get much better in terms of a first primary setup right now, and although I've only had it for a few months now, it's been an absolute game changer. So this will be my main lens for Mull. It's a perfect focal distance for things like otters, but also filling the frame with the sea eagles that we'll hopefully see when we're doing the white-tailed eagles on Mull charters. Now, with a prime lens, you obviously don't have the flexibility of the zoom, so I've also got a couple of teleconverters. So I've got the 1.4 and the 2x teleconverter, which I can either use on the 400mm, which takes, the 1.4 will take it to 540mm at f4. The 2x will take it to 800mm at f5.6. So again, you've got the flexibility then of getting closer if you need to. And yes, you obviously have to put the teleconverter on in situ, but for me, that's not too much of an issue. Then, as I said before, I will probably use this as my secondary lens. Now, this is the Sony A74 f4 macro. So it's a brilliant lens. You can use it for portraits, you can use it for landscapes, you can use it obviously with the flexibility of the zoom, and you can also shoot close and therefore get macro images with this as well. So the minimum focal distance for the 70-200 at macro is 0.26 meters, so 26 centimeters at the wide end and 42 centimeters at the telephoto end. So you can get pretty close to a subject if you're doing macro photography, which again is great to have the flexibility. But for Mull, and when I'm on safari, this will predominantly be on my second body, the A74, as a more environmental lens to give me the options of filling the frame when subjects are closer or larger, but also having the ability to capture a subject in its environment at further distance. Then I've also got the 24-105 Sony F4, which I use for landscapes predominantly, but also sometimes when I'm doing some vlogging, particularly in situ, but predominantly a landscape lens, which is pretty versatile. It also doubles up as a portrait lens as well, although it's not as good as things like the 85mm portrait lens that Sony do. But the flexibility, again, of having the zoom is great, 24-105. That probably won't make the cut to Mull because of space. I'm flying up to Glasgow and then hiring a car and driving up to Oban and getting the ferry over, so weight is definitely an issue. So I just need to be mindful of that. And I will probably take the 400 2.8, the 70-200, and then the teleconverters. So then obviously everything is backed up. So I'll take my MacBook M1 Pro with me, which is an amazing machine to be able to edit images on. I'm not a massive user of Photoshop. I predominantly use Lightroom, and this is brilliant for Lightroom. It's fast, it uploads fast, it works fast as long as I back things up, and I've got a couple of external hard drives that I use as backup. What I'll typically do is I will back up all of my images at the end of a day. I'm a bit funny like that. I like to back all my images up, put them onto a hard drive, put them onto Lightroom. Lightroom will then upload them to the cloud as long as I've got Wi-Fi. They're then stored in multiple places. I will then format my cards at the end of the day so that I start the new day with a fresh set of cards. Sometimes I'm carrying obviously the camera around, and when I am, I've got a Peak Design slide strap, which is great, which clips on using the little toggles, and it's been fantastic, so I'll be using that. So when I'm not handheld, particularly on Mull, I'll typically use a monopod. I'm not going to take a tripod with me, but a monopod is just as good in my opinion, unless you're needing complete rigidity to be able to do video footage or slow shutter speeds. This will give me the necessary stable base when I'm on Mull charters, for example, if I'm looking to take some video footage there where a tripod just isn't practical. And hand holding the 400mm to take video footage isn't ideal. It can be done, but it's not ideal. So what I'll probably do is I've got a three-legged thing fluid head, which I will use on the top of the monopod. It's beautifully engineered. So the monopod is Leo Photo, exactly the same make as my tripod, and then I use the three-legged thing fluid head. As I said, it's manufactured beautifully, and it just gives me that solid base to then be able to use the fluid head to get some video footage. And when I'm not on the boat, and particularly looking for otters, I will be using this, which is a beanbag. It's got no content at the moment because I'm obviously trying to save weight on the trip up, but I will fill it with either rice or lentils or something similar, which is what I typically fill it with anyway. And as you can see, this video isn't sponsored, I'm not sponsored, but I use Roland Pro. It's exactly the same as all of my lens coats. So they're all Roland Pro on the 200-600 and on the 400 prime. It comes over on AliExpress, probably from China. It's unbelievably well manufactured. It's hard wearing, it's rugged material. And I know a lot of people that spend an awful lot of money on lens coat, and I've got nothing against them, but in my opinion, these perform better. So Roland Pro, for anybody that hasn't checked it out before, I would wholeheartedly recommend that you do. My drone obviously appears in quite a lot of my YouTube content now, drone footage, and so this is the DJI Mini 3 Pro. It's 249 grams, it doesn't weigh very much at all, and because it's under 250 grams, you obviously have to have less in terms of licensing than you would have to have if you were flying something heavier. So I've got that, it takes a micro SD card. I've got 3 batteries, and each of them give me around 15 to 18 minutes of fly time. I've also got the controller, which has got the built-in screen. I've got a screen protector on there, which has got one of the glare protectors on it. So actually in any light, it doesn't matter how bright it is, I can still see where I'm flying, which obviously if you're flying a drone is quite useful. I didn't speak about batteries. So spare batteries, I always take spare batteries with me. I've got a pouch which has got spare batteries in it. I've obviously got a battery grip on both of my camera bodies, which stores 2 batteries. Obviously, digital photography, particularly mirrorless digital photography, can eat batteries. And having a spare battery, I always have a spare battery when I go out in my pocket. It's just not worth getting caught short. So spare batteries, and again, I'll charge all my batteries to full power at the end of every day. Pouch of spare memory cards, and then cleaning kit, plus rocket blower to be able to clean the lenses and the sensors. And another recent addition, which is probably going to prove to be quite useful, is I've got a HikMicro Thermal scope. I first saw these on a video from Simon Eardley and decided that it was going to be a bit of a game changer addition. So for me, this is great when you're looking for owls and nocturnal species, but equally it's great for seeing mammals during the day because it's completely thermal. So for example, when we're out looking for otters, it's going to pick up an otter laying in the kelp or laying in the seaweed on the beach, that would otherwise perhaps take us a lot longer to find with the naked eye and with binoculars. So thermal scope, bit of a game changer. And then at the other end of the day, if we're going out early or staying out late, it's always useful to have a head torch. So I've got a head torch, which is a LED lenser or LED lenser head torch. Always useful to carry when you've got the space. And again, something that's useful to have when you go on safari as well. I'm old school, so I'm taking a Mull map. Now I have downloaded a map of Mull onto my iPhone so that I've got offline maps on Google Maps, but also having this for me is a bit of a game changer. It's got all of my locations on. I've drawn them all on there, but just to have in the car in case the phone battery goes or for whatever reason, it's just useful to know that you've got backup to digital maps in the form of a hard map. I'm also taking a bag with me of camo. So I think it's really important that you conceal yourself, particularly when you're looking for otters. So I will have camo with me in the boot of the car all the time, and particularly if I'm laying observing otters, you need to make sure that you're as concealed as possible. So just having a little bit of additional camo on to break up the silhouette is always going to help. And then finally, my bag. So this is the Low Pro 550, and I take the top section off. It comes with a top section that clips on. I actually use that as a sling bag when I'm traveling to have things like my passport in. But the purpose of using that is that it's carry-on compatible. So it can go in even the strictest dimensions for carry-on luggage. And for me, I don't want to be putting my camera gear in the hold. Even if it's in a big rugged pelly case, I'd much prefer to have it on board with me and know that it's safe. Not just to keep it safe, but also luggage goes missing. And if you are traveling to a far-flung destination to photograph incredible wildlife, you don't want to be waiting for 2 or 3 days for your camera to arrive. You can get away with it if it's clothes, in the clothes that you're wearing, even if you have to replace a few items of clothing. But it's very hard to replace camera gear. So always, if you can, have your camera gear on the plane with you so you know it's safe, but also so that you know that you're going to have it. And as a little tip, if you get onto that plane or if you get to that check-in desk and they want to check your carry-on camera bag into the hold luggage, just tell them that it's full of lithium batteries. 9 times out of 10, they won't want to put lithium batteries in the hold, and they will let you carry it on the plane with you as hand luggage. Little top tip. Absolutely key bit of kit for me, and I've spoken about it before for those of you that have listened to the Wild X podcast, is these binoculars. They don't have to be Swarovskis, but these Swarovskis are absolutely phenomenal. They create more light than exists, which blows my mind every time. They're amazing in low light, but also 10 by 42 for me would be the recommendation that I'd make to anybody who's doing a combination of photography and birding. But it means that you can observe your subject before you get anywhere near it, which means that you can observe them in their natural habitat. It means that you can observe them in an environment that they're behaving naturally in. And for me, if you're capturing a subject in its natural habitat, displaying natural behavior, it's much more appealing and pleasing on the eye than it is a subject that is just looking straight down the lens. Well, that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it slightly different. I hope you found it interesting. Everybody's different. Everybody takes different gear with them. Obviously, people use different manufacturers, but hopefully you've taken something from this. If you have, please consider giving it a like. And if you've enjoyed this or my other content and you haven't already, please consider giving it a subscribe. It helps massively grow the channel and I really do appreciate it. Until next time, I'll see you out there.